It was just another ordinary day in the life of a wealthy businessman, at least. That's what he thought. Living a life of luxury, filled with expensive cars, sprawling mansions, and exclusive parties. He never expected that a single phone call would change everything. The news came as a shock. He had inherited a horse. Not just any horse, though. This one had a mysterious lineage, one shrouded in secrets and whispered legends. It wasn't just a rare breed, it was said to possess powers beyond anything imaginable, capable of healing the most unlikely wounds. At first, he didn't believe a word of it. Magic? Healing? Ridiculous. But when he arrived at the remote, almost forgotten ranch where the horse was kept, something was different. The air felt charged, as if the land itself held a secret. The horse, with its silvery mane and eyes that seemed to reflect the depth of centuries, was unlike anything he had ever seen. Its calm demeanor was deceiving. There was something ancient and powerful about it. He tried to ignore the unsettling feeling that gnawed at him, but the moment he came closer to the animal, he felt it in energy that seemed to pulse beneath his skin. It was as if the horse was not just a creature, but a key to something much larger, something beyond his understanding. His logical, business-minded world collided with the mystical, and he wasn't prepared for what would come next. The first sign of the horse's powers came unexpectedly. When a minor accident occurred during his visit, a simple fall that left him with a cut on his hand, he did what anyone in his position would do. He went straight to the doctor. But as he reached for his phone to make a call, something strange happened. The horse approached him, its hooves barely making a sound on the dusty ground. Without touching him, it stood there, gazing at his injury. Within seconds, the pain vanished, and the cut healed right before his eyes, leaving no trace of its existence. Confused, amazed, and slightly disturbed, he stumbled back. Was it really possible? Was this some sort of trick, or was the horse truly magical? The incident raised more questions than answers. How was it that a horse, an animal that was supposed to be nothing more than a simple companion, could possess such extraordinary abilities? What other powers did it hold? And why had it been passed down through generations, hidden away in the quiet countryside? The more he thought about it, the more the weight of his inheritance seemed to press down on him. It was clear that this horse was no ordinary animal, and the secrets it carried could change the course of his life forever. As the days went on, he found himself drawn back to the ranch, unable to stay away. The horse, which he had initially dismissed as a curiosity, became a focal point of his thoughts. But the deeper he delved into its origins, the more he realized that its abilities weren't just about healing wounds. The horse had the power to heal more than just physical injuries. It could mend broken hearts, fix fractured relationships, and even heal emotional scars that ran deep within a person's soul. At first, he thought it was absurd. He was a millionaire, a man who had everything he could ever want: money, power, and influence. What use would he have for such an ability? He had no need for healing emotional wounds, and he certainly didn't believe in any form of magic. But as he watched the horse work its strange wonders on others, people who came seeking help from across the country, he began to see that there was something real to the legend. There were transformations happening that couldn't be explained away by logic or science. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he witnessed something that would haunt him forever. A woman, battered by years of grief and loss, approached the horse in desperation. She had heard the rumors, the whispers about its powers, and had traveled from afar hoping for a miracle. She had lost a child, and no amount of money, therapy, or time could ease her heartache. But as she stood before the horse, tears streaming down her face, something remarkable happened. The horse moved toward her, and in that instant, its gaze seemed to reach deep inside her. For the first time in years, she smiled, her pain lifting as if the weight of it had vanished. It was as though the horse had touched something deep within her and healed it in a way nothing else could. The man watched in awe, realizing that the horse's powers weren't just about magic, they were about connection. The ability to heal came from understanding, from empathy, from something far more profound than anything he had ever experienced. And with that realization, everything in his life began to change. He began to understand that his inheritance was more than just a gift. It was a responsibility, a calling that he wasn't sure he was ready for. But as he embraced the mystery of the horse and began to explore its powers, darker forces began to stir. There were people who wanted the horse for themselves, to use its abilities for their own gain. And these people weren't afraid to do whatever it took to get it. The man found himself caught in a dangerous game, one that would force him to confront not only the magic of the horse, but the shadows of his own past. As the tension grew and the stakes became higher, the man had to decide, would he protect the horse and its incredible powers, or would he turn his back on everything and risk losing something far more valuable than money? In the quiet, moonlit nights on the ranch, as the horse stood watch, he knew the time was coming when he would have to make a choice that would change his life forever. And just when he thought he had everything figured out, a mysterious stranger appeared at the edge of the ranch. A stranger with an agenda of their own, one that threatened not only the horse's safety, but the very future of everything the man had come to believe. What did this stranger know? And could he trust them? Or was this just another piece of the puzzle that threatened to shatter his world completely? The night the stranger arrived, the ranch seemed quieter than usual, as if the land itself was holding its breath. The moonlight cast long, sharp shadows across the open fields, and the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it an unsettling sense of anticipation. The man stood at the window of the old ranch house, watching the figure approach, a silhouette against the dim glow of the stars. There was something about the way the stranger moved, purposeful, deliberate, that sent a shiver down his spine. The moment he saw the figure step closer, he knew this was no coincidence. This was someone who knew exactly what they were after. His first instinct was to turn away, to ignore the visitor, and retreat to the comforts of his wealth and security. But he couldn't. The horse, the magical creature that had already altered his life in ways he couldn't comprehend, had become more than just an inheritance. It was something he felt responsible for, something he needed to protect at all costs. His connection with the animal, though still fresh and confusing, was undeniable. And that connection was now under threat. The stranger reached the gates of the ranch and stopped, standing just beyond the reach of the moon's light. There was no rush in their movement, no frantic energy, just a quiet calm that suggested patience and a deep understanding of something the man couldn't yet grasp. The man hesitated, torn between confronting this mysterious figure and waiting to see if they would leave. But the stranger wasn't going anywhere. He could feel their eyes on him, even from this distance. It wasn't until the following morning that the man decided to face the stranger head-on. The ranch was still as it always was at dawn, the only sounds being the occasional chirp of a bird or the rustle of leaves. The horse stood calmly in the stable, its presence as steady and unchanging as the earth itself. The man approached the barn with cautious steps, knowing that whatever conversation was to come would likely change everything once again. The stranger was waiting by the barn, their back turned to him as they gazed at the horse, who seemed to regard the newcomer with the same quiet patience. They had a presence that felt ancient, almost like they had been waiting here for a long time, though how that was possible, the man couldn't say. The air between them hummed with a strange energy, as though something unspoken was hanging in the balance. "You know what it can do, don't you?" the stranger said without turning around. Their voice was low, measured, as if every word was chosen with care. "The horse. It isn't just for healing. It's much more than that." The man's heart skipped a beat. How did they know? How could anyone know? He opened his mouth to ask, but the stranger turned before he could speak, their eyes meeting his. They weren't threatening or angry, but there was a certain knowing in their gaze, something that made him feel small, like a child being read a secret history of the world that he had never been told. "You're not the first to come here," the stranger continued, their tone now filled with an edge of quiet bitterness. "There are others people who would do anything to control it, to use its power for their own desires. And those people don't care who they hurt in the process. You might think you can protect it, but you don't fully understand what you're up against." "Not yet." The man's pulse quickened. He had always thought of himself as untouchable, someone who could handle anything that came his way. But now, facing the stranger, the reality of what he was dealing with seemed far more complicated. The horse had never been just a mysterious gift. It was part of something much bigger, something far older than his own understanding of the world. And whatever powers the horse had, they were tied to forces beyond his control. "You've been chosen," the stranger added, their eyes narrowing as if they could see right through him. "But you need to understand that choice comes with a cost. The horse doesn't just heal, it alters. It changes the very fabric of what it touches. People don't just walk away from it unchanged." A rush of thoughts flooded his mind, each one more confusing than the last. He thought back to the moment he had seen the horse heal the woman, how her grief had seemed to lift as if it was never there. But what else could it do? Was there a price to pay for such extraordinary abilities? And what did the stranger mean by altering the fabric of what it touched? Could it affect more than just the physical world? The stranger took a slow step toward the man, their eyes never leaving his. "You're playing a dangerous game. Protect it, and it will protect you. But don't think for a second that it won't ask for something in return. The question is, are you willing to pay the price?" The tension in the air thickened. The man could feel the weight of the words pressing down on him. He had never believed in magic, never once entertained the idea that something could exist that defied all logic. But now, as he stood before the stranger, he wasn't so sure. This wasn't about simple healing or miraculous cures. It was about power, about forces that operated on a scale he couldn't even begin to comprehend. As if on cue, the horse, which had been standing quietly in the barn, let out a soft whinny, its eyes shining with an intelligence that seemed far beyond that of any ordinary animal. It was as if it was listening, as if it understood the conversation unfolding between them. The man turned toward it, a wave of uncertainty crashing over him. Was the horse aware of the danger it was in? Was it a willing participant in this strange game? Or was it a pawn, like him, caught in a web of forces they couldn't escape? Before he could voice his thoughts, the stranger stepped back, as though sensing the man's internal conflict. "You'll need to make a choice soon," they said, their voice cold and final. "Because others are coming. And when they do, you won't be able to protect it alone." With that, the stranger turned and walked away, disappearing into the mist that had begun to settle over the ranch. The man was left standing in the barn, the sound of the horse's steady breathing the only thing that broke the silence. But in the back of his mind, the question lingered. Who were these others, and what would they do to get what they wanted? And more importantly, was he ready to fight for the horse, for the magical force that had already begun to change his life? The man stood frozen in the barn, the stranger's warning echoing in his ears. For the first time since inheriting the horse, a cold realization crept over him. He wasn't just holding a powerful gift. He was sitting on a ticking time bomb. The horse's powers were undeniable, but what could he do if someone more dangerous than the stranger came for it? And what price would he have to pay to keep it safe? Days passed in a blur, the man's thoughts constantly circling around the strange visitor's words. Every time he returned to the ranch, the horse seemed to watch him with a knowing gaze, as if it too understood the growing tension. The connection between them deepened, there was no denying it now. The horse wasn't just an animal, it was a force of nature, a living, breathing mystery that could alter the very course of his life. But just as he was beginning to think he might be ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, an unexpected turn of events sent everything spiraling out of control. It started with a phone call. A woman on the other end, her voice trembling with fear, claimed to know something about the horse. She spoke of an ancient order, a group of people who had been guarding the horse for centuries. They were the keepers of its secret, its protectors. But now they feared the horse had been awakened, and that meant disaster was coming. According to her, the horse had been hidden away for a reason. It was never meant to be found by someone like him, someone who would use its power without understanding the consequences. The woman begged him to meet, to hear the truth of what he was dealing with before it was too late. Intrigued, but also terrified, the man agreed to meet her in a secluded cafe, far from prying eyes. As he walked in, his eyes scanned the room, looking for the woman who had spoken to him. He wasn't sure if he could trust her, but something about the urgency in her voice felt genuine. When she finally approached him, he barely recognized her. She had the same tired eyes as the stranger, but her face was pale, drawn. Her hands shook as she slid into the seat across from him. "You have no idea what you've unleashed," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The horse, it's not just a healer. It's an ancient being, part of a long-forgotten lineage. Its power doesn't come without a cost. And there are others dangerous people who will stop at nothing to control it." The man frowned. "What do you mean by dangerous people? And why should I believe you?" The woman's gaze flickered nervously over her shoulder, as if expecting someone to be watching them. "Because they're already coming for you. The horse, it's been hiding in plain sight for centuries. You're not the first to stumble upon it, but you might be the last if you're not careful. There's a group, a secret organization, and they've been searching for the horse for years. They know its power, and they want to use it for their own gain." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "And they've been watching you, ever since you arrived at the ranch." His stomach twisted. The stranger had warned him, but hearing it from her made the threat feel real. He felt his chest tighten. What do they want with it? They want to control it. The horse doesn't just heal. It has the power to manipulate time, to change the course of events. If they get their hands on it, they'll use it to rewrite history itself. Imagine what someone with that kind of power could do. Her voice quivered as she finished the sentence. They could erase everything you've ever known. They could destroy you before you even realize what's happening. The man stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "Why me? Why would they come for me?" "Because you have it now. You've awakened it. And you're connected to it in ways you can't even comprehend yet. They know this, and they'll stop at nothing to take it from you." The room seemed to spin around him as the realization hit. The horse wasn't just a passive object of power, it was a key to something far more dangerous. Something he had no idea how to control. He had inherited a legacy far beyond anything he could have imagined. But the worst part? He couldn't protect it alone. Not anymore. Just as he stood up to leave, a sharp noise outside caught his attention. The woman's eyes widened, panic flooding her face. "You have to go. Now." Before he could react, the door to the cafe slammed open. Two men stepped inside, their eyes scanning the room like hunters on the prowl. They were dressed in dark suits, their faces obscured by sunglasses, though the man could see the coldness in their eyes. The woman stood up quickly, grabbing his arm with surprising strength. "Run," she hissed. Without thinking, He followed her out the back door and into the narrow alley behind the cafe. His heart pounded in his chest as they ran, the sounds of footsteps echoing behind them. He didn't know who these men were, but he knew they weren't just ordinary threats. They were after the horse, and they wouldn't stop until they had it. They made it to a small, hidden car in the alley, the woman quickly unlocking it and pushing him inside. As the engine roared to life, she glanced at him with wide, fearful eyes. "This is only the beginning," she said breathlessly. "You have no idea what they're capable of. But we need to get to the horse. You have to protect it. They'll be coming for it, and when they do, nothing will stand in their way." As they sped down the dark streets, the man couldn't shake the feeling that everything was spiraling out of control. He was no longer just a businessman. He was a target, caught in a web of secrets and power that threatened to consume everything he had. And as the car raced toward the ranch, a chilling thought struck him. If they found the horse, would it be enough to stop them, or would they use its power against him? The stakes had never been higher. As the car sped toward the ranch, the man's mind raced, each thought tumbling over the other in a desperate scramble for clarity. The woman beside him, her grip tight on the wheel, glanced over at him with urgency in her eyes. "You have to trust the horse," she said, her voice strained with fear. "It's the key to stopping them, but it will only help if you understand it. You're not just its protector, you're its partner. It's waiting for you to realize what it can really do." His thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion. How could he understand something so elusive? How could he control something as powerful as the horse? Something that had already altered the course of his life in unimaginable ways. But as the ranch came into view, a new feeling washed over him: resolve. He didn't know if he could fully grasp the horse's true potential, but he had to try. He had no choice. When they arrived at the barn, the man leapt out of the car and rushed toward the stable, his heart pounding in his chest. The horse was waiting for him, its eyes fixed on him with an intensity that sent a chill through his body. The air around it seemed to hum with energy, as if it was calling to him. The woman followed closely behind, her eyes darting around as if expecting danger to spring from the shadows at any moment. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered, feeling a wave of helplessness. "I don't know what it needs." "You'll figure it out," she replied, her voice filled with a quiet certainty that he didn't entirely share. But before he could say anything else, they heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching, rapid and purposeful. The two men from the cafe were closing in. They had found them. Without hesitation, the woman grabbed his arm. "It's now or never," she said. "You need to trust the horse. Let it show you what it's capable of." With a deep breath, the man approached the horse, his hand trembling as he reached out to touch its mane. As soon as his fingers brushed its silvery strands, an electric shock of energy surged through his body. He felt his heart race, but it wasn't fear that gripped him. It was something far more powerful, something ancient. The horse's energy pulsed within him, and suddenly, everything became clear. He could see the path before him, the way the horse's power could reshape the very world around them. It wasn't just about healing. It was about control, about bending time itself. The two men rounded the corner of the barn, their eyes fixed on the man and the horse, their movements swift and calculated. "You can't protect it forever," one of them sneered. "We've waited too long for this. The power of the horse belongs to us." The man didn't respond. He didn't need to. Instead, he took a deep breath and closed his eyes. As he did, the air around him seemed to shift, the world itself warping just slightly. He could feel time itself stretching and bending beneath his touch. It was as if the very fabric of reality was at his fingertips. The horse's powers had unlocked something within him, something he had never known he possessed. The two men froze, suddenly disoriented. The barn seemed to stretch before them, the shadows warping unnaturally as the man felt a deep connection to the horse and understanding of how they could work together. The men's movements became sluggish, their expressions full of confusion. But the man knew this was just the beginning. He wasn't simply standing in front of them anymore. He was standing at the center of a force far greater than anything they had imagined. He stepped forward, his eyes locked on the men. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," he said, his voice calm but filled with an authority he didn't know he had. "The horse doesn't bend to anyone's will. It works with those who understand its purpose, who are willing to sacrifice for it." His voice gained strength. "And you've made the mistake of thinking you can control it." As he spoke, time seemed to slow, the world around them frozen in place. He didn't know how he was doing it, whether it was the horse's power or his own. But he knew that this was the moment of truth. The men were trapped in a moment they couldn't escape, caught between reality and something beyond their comprehension. The woman at his side watched in awe as the man's transformation unfolded before her. She had seen the horse's power before, but never had she seen anyone tap into it so fully. It wasn't just magic, it was mastery over something far deeper, something that defied explanation. The man felt the weight of the moment settle over him. He was no longer just protecting the horse. He had become a part of its legacy. And with that realization, everything shifted. With a single thought, he reversed the flow of time. The men who had been closing in on him suddenly found themselves at the edge of the property, their bodies frozen in place, unable to move or speak. The man could feel the power radiating through him, and as he took a breath, he knew that he had just altered the course of fate. The men would not harm him or the horse again. As the horse lowered its head, its eyes glistening with approval, the man let out a shaky breath. The world around him seemed to snap back into focus, the tension slowly easing from his shoulders. He had done it. He had protected the horse, and in doing so had unlocked a power he couldn't fully understand. But even as the threat passed, there was a lingering question in the back of his mind. What now? What would he do with the power he now held? He had seen the consequences of unchecked ambition, how the men had sought the horse for their own selfish purposes. He couldn't let that happen again. The horse had chosen him for a reason, and he knew that its powers needed to be guarded, not exploited. As the sun began to rise over the ranch, casting a soft golden glow across the fields, the man turned to the woman beside him. "I don't know what comes next," he said quietly, "but I'm ready to find out. I'll protect the horse not just from others, but from myself." The woman smiled, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Then you've already learned the most important lesson of all." And with that, the man and the horse stood side by side, not just as protector and creature, but as partners bound by a force greater than either of them had ever known. The legacy of the horse had been secured, its power now in the hands of someone who truly understood its weight. But as the wind whispered through the trees, the man couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. There were other forces out there, ones that would challenge him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. And though the road ahead was uncertain, he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't alone. The horse, with its mystical powers and ancient wisdom, would always be by his side, and together they would face whatever came next.